My name is Adrienne Vetter. I am the artist who painted the series of figures known as the Wild West Social Justice mural that's part of the Laramie Mural Project. There was just this concept of, since the alleyway it's walked a lot, and so it was a brainstorm about it's kind of a hidden space, but it's a space that's trafficked a lot. So we came up with the concept of what if somebody is walking through there and then just came upon these different hidden figures. And so it's a bit of a different concept than some of the other really obvious walls that have murals in town. So it's more of like a stumble upon this and maybe find out something that you didn't know. As far as the figures, the idea was that they would be connected to Wyoming in some way, ideally connected to Laramie, but be somebody that wasn't as well known perhaps as other historical figures. So for me, I kind of got a little overambitious and like I was going to do all of these figures and had to figure out a way that it would have a theme to it. So for me, I think that Laramie is a place in the state where a lot of movements for equity and social justice, and you're able to actually talk about some of the pressing issues of the time, like because the university is there and there's a catalyzing force of students kind of becoming aware of things and people from other places bringing in new ideas. So I settled on the theme of social justice as a way to unify the figures I was choosing. And then kind of these moments in Wyoming history that had to do with social justice movements, like the Black 14 in like 1969, that story, the Angel action around the killing of Matthew Shepard and the aftermath of that. It was kind of a way to juxtapose that with a more like Wild West history. So initially, because it's so huge and you come around that corner and you see the whole wall, that their attention is caught enough to like go and look and say, okay, who are these people? Why did an artist take the time to paint them all together in this way? And what is the relationship between all these people? And how do I find out more about these people's stories? So the mural itself has these sub-themes of like stories related to the LGBTQ plus community. And so it was really special to me that I was working on it at a time, and it lent itself to the timeline where we could do a dedication for the mural around the same time as Laramie Pride Fest was having its events. And so that could kind of come together with events that also had to do with the vigil for Matthew Shepard. And I kind of felt like one way to talk about those events was to talk about the friends of his and community members who came out to like actually confront like the Westboro Baptist Church in the aftermath of all that, and just come together to create a sense of like, hey, this isn't the community of Laramie. We want to, actually interrupt that and say, we're the people here and this is our value. So that was special to me, to be able to make some artwork that relates to that part of Laramie's past that I think we're still trying to wrap our minds around. So bring up like difficult topics, I guess, and trying to use public art as a way to catalyze discussion. When you walk into the alley, the corner facing the alleyway, you'll see a figure painted in black and white. His name is Jose Gomez. And so he grew up in Wyoming near Reliance and Warland area. And his father worked in the coal mines there. And at the time, Warland segregated its primary school children and operated like a second school called the Mexican School. And so he and his sister were the first Latino students to attend integrated school. And so it kind of instilled in him this lifelong passion for education and how the opportunities that it offered. He actually attended the University of Wyoming for his bachelor's degree and eventually moved to California, where he worked with Cesar Chavez. And so he really had a role in the United Farm Workers movement, and also had this other social justice background where he was an advocate for LGBT civil rights. And so I don't think people really know of him in Wyoming, and it was so interesting when I painted the mural. I just was inspired by his story. As you go around the edge of the building, there's a section related to women's suffrage in Wyoming, and the two figures that are painted in black and white there are Grace Raymond Hebard. She is known as actually a historian, suffragist, somebody who worked for the University of Wyoming and built up the library to what it now is. She had a civil engineering degree. She devoted like 40 plus years of her life to improving the university, serving on the board of trustees. She also had a relationship with another UW professor, Agnes Wergeland, who was also a pioneering woman in her own right. And they built a house together, which they and their students called the Doctor's Inn, and where they lived until Wergeland passed away. And so she just inspired me as somebody who was connected with the suffrage movement and had connections to the larger national movement. And then also cared about like the history of Wyoming. Another figure in the women's suffrage section of the mural is Mary Bellamy, and actually Lake Marie, if you've gone into like the Snowy Range there and gone to Lake Marie, is named after her. She was the first woman to be elected to the Wyoming legislature in the state's history, and was a representative from Albany County. What impressed me about her was her kind of advocacy for the welfare of women and children, and legislation that would improve that. She also was interested in like how to kind of reform the penal institutions of our state for juveniles, and I assume just in general. But she was a member of the Council of Women Voters. She was friends with Carrie Chapman Catt, and actually traveled to the 1917 National Rally for Women's Suffrage. And so as you go along on the wall, you'll see like a stagecoach kind of background. And the man who's painted in black and white there, his name is Reverend James Reeb. His connection with Wyoming is a little bit more kind of adjacent. He married, his wife was from Natrona County. He attended Natrona County High School and Casper College, and then went and did his seminary studies in Minnesota, but he did come back to the University of Wyoming in 1949 to do some of his coursework. But he actually had a passion for the civil rights of the time that were happening, with all of the marches that were going on in the South for voting rights for African Americans. And so the connection there to that whole movement was he was actually the reverend who was beaten to death in Selma after that walk, the march on March 12th, 1965. And so I think people don't really know that he has a connection to Wyoming. But he was one of the clergy that responded to the call from Martin Luther King Jr. that clergy come and join them for where they're crossing the Edmund Pettit Bridge. But I think his family has this incredible legacy even still in Wyoming. As you go further into like that little alcove of the mural area, there you'll see three figures that are in what came to be called the angel action. They have large angel wings made from white fabric. The figures there, they're the friends and community members who knew Matthew Shepard. And after Matthew was killed, there was the Westboro Church that came and demonstrated at his funeral, and then came back during the trial of his killers with huge signs that, like, in fluorescent colors, that just said awful things, hateful speech. And so after the Westboro Church did that at his funeral, these folks got together and said, what could we do as a counter protest? And so it was a silent, peaceful counter protest where they created these large wings to try to block some of that hate speech, and just create another thing that Laramie became known for. I think Angel Action is now like a way of countering that kind of hate speech in other places as well. But it kind of originated in some ways here in Laramie. And I just know the friend of Matthew Shepard, who is the first figure on the left, she just, as somebody who is from Wyoming, talked about how, as they were seeing everything that was portrayed of Matthew Shepard and Laramie on television, she thought about the children and nieces and nephews growing up who that's what they would see and come to know Laramie and Matthew Shepard for. And so she just felt strongly about organizing an iconography that would be counter to that and show a different perspective. So